Parchman Farm. In 1901, Mississippi state authorities opened a correctional facility called Parchman Farm. It occupied thousands of acres of agricultural land and served as a place of confinement for inmates, including juveniles. System combining a school, a farm, and a prison. Adolescents from low-income families were sent there by court order. The formal goal was to teach discipline and work ethic. In practice, students were given numbers instead of names and assigned to the fields. Guards with rifles stood over them. Every day, the adolescents worked for 10 or more hours under the sun. They picked cotton, planted corn, and repaired fences. Disciplinary measures were used for violating the routine. Adolescents were forced to stand motionless for hours, deprived of sleep and food, and subjected to corporal punishment. Violators were placed in dark isolation cells with no windows or ventilation. Archival records of the Justice Department documented cases of beatings and prolonged solitary confinement. In the 1960s, representatives of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, began collecting testimonies from former inmates. By 1970, the materials grew into the lawsuit Gates vs. Collier. Former adolescents testified in court, describing the labor, deprivations, and punishments applied at Parchman Farm. In 1972, a federal court ruled that the system of punishment was unconstitutional under the U.S. Constitution. The court's decision banned the use of whips, forced labor, and isolation for disciplinary purposes. The prison management began reforms, and facilities for juveniles were removed from the complex. In 1974, state authorities approved a new system for juvenile rehabilitation. By the 1980s, the farm had fully transitioned to the control of the Department of Prisons. Today, its archives store documents showing how discipline and labor reform turned into one of the most infamous examples of school punishment in American history. Judge Rotenberg Center. In 1971, psychologist Matthew Israel founded the Judge Rotenberg Center, JRC, in Canton, Massachusetts, USA. The goal of the institution was to correct students with autism, intellectual disabilities, or behavioral disorders through strict behavioral control. The school became infamous due to a single device, the Graduated Electronic Decelerator, GED. This small apparatus was capable of administering an electric shock. By the late 1980s, Matthew and his team were using the GED to prevent self-injurious or aggressive actions. The shocks lasted several seconds and delivered a current of up to 90 milliamperes, significantly stronger than standard stun guns. The center claimed that electrical aversion training was more effective than medication or physical restraint. Parents signed consent forms after the behavioral treatment plans were approved. Between 2002 and 2007, numerous incidents drew public attention. In 2002, staff applied 31 electric shocks to an 18-year-old student named Andre McCollins for refusing to take off his coat. He was restrained to a board for 7 hours and then hospitalized. In 2007, school employees received a prank call demanding that 2 students be punished at night. One student received 77 electric shocks, and the other received 29. Both suffered burns. The GED was used not only for life-threatening behaviors, but also for non-aggressive violations, sloppiness, and improper appearance. From 2010 to 2019, human rights organizations and international bodies documented this practice. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture strongly urged the United States to prohibit the use of GED devices. Former staff reported that some residents wore the shock devices all day and received shocks for minor offenses such as standing up, shouting, or moving during class. The Food and Drug Administration, FDA, initiated an investigation into the device. In March 2020, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, imposed a federal ban on the use of the GED, stating that the device presented an unreasonable risk of harm. The center appealed, and in 2021, a federal court overturned the ban, citing limits on the FDA's authority. To this day, the Judge Rotenberg Center remains the only institution in the U.S. that still uses electric shock devices for behavior modification. The Scottish Tawse. Tawse, a thick leather strap with 2 or 3 split ends, darkened by years of use and marked by the hands that made it. Crafted by leatherworkers in the Scottish town of Lochalee, it became one of the most recognizable tools of discipline in the early 20th century. In the early 1900s, this strap appeared in schools across Scotland, from Glasgow to Edinburgh and Fife. Teachers simply called it the strap. Students knew it as part of their daily routine. It hung beside the blackboard, its presence a constant reminder of the rules. Children began their education knowing that any tardiness or mistake in a dictation exercise could end with strikes to the palm of the hand. The Tawse, with its split ends, intensified each blow, a design that teachers claimed helped to cultivate attention. Both girls and boys received the same punishments, and the number of strokes depended on the severity of the offense. By the 1960s, reports of an increase in the number of punishments began to appear in schools. Parents started filing complaints, and newspapers published stories of students who had received up to 6 strokes in a row. The Ministry of Education received dozens of letters a month requesting a review of the discipline rules. In 1976, incidents in Glasgow schools triggered parliamentary hearings. In 1982, the case of Campbell and Cossins v. United Kingdom reached the European Court of Human Rights. Grace Campbell and Jane Cossins were two Scottish mothers whose sons attended schools in the Strathclyde region, where the Tawse was still used as punishment. They refused to allow corporal discipline for their children, arguing that it violated their right to raise them according to personal convictions. The court examined whether physical punishment in public schools aligned with Article 2 of Protocol No. 1 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which protects parents' rights to ensure education in conformity with their beliefs. The judges ruled that the continued use of the Tawse in schools was incompatible with those rights. Following the court's decision, the Scottish government issued Circular No. 14/1982, officially banning the use of the Tawse in schools. The straps were taken down from the walls and moved to archives. Some examples are now preserved in the National Museum of Scotland as part of the history of school discipline, concluding an era where a leather strap defined order in the classroom. The Canadian Indian residential school system operated as a nationwide institution of forced assimilation. It was created by the Canadian government to integrate Indigenous children into Euro-Canadian culture through education. The system relied on religious organizations, primarily Catholic and Protestant churches, to manage the schools. The goal was to eliminate native languages and traditions by enforcing European customs and Christian teachings. In 1883, the government opened the first residential school in Battleford. There, children lived in the schools year-round. They performed manual labor, attended classes, and followed strict routines. Speaking Indigenous languages, wearing traditional clothing, or practicing local customs led to corporal punishment. Children were beaten, strapped, or hit with rulers or sticks for misbehaving. Food and medical care were scarce, and diseases such as tuberculosis and pneumonia spread quickly. Survivors from Kamloops, Fort Albany, and St. Anne's schools were even being forced to kneel for hours or hit across the mouth for uttering a single word in Cree, Ojibwe, or Dean. In 1907, Dr. Peter Henderson Bryce, the Chief Medical Officer of Indian Affairs, exposed that up to 25 to 50% of children in some schools had died from preventable illnesses. His reports were suppressed by Duncan Campbell Scott, then the Deputy Superintendent of Indian Affairs, who prioritized assimilation over child welfare. By the 1930s, more than 80 schools operated across Canada. Corporal punishment and psychological control became institutional practice. Attempts to escape were met with severe consequences, and many students never returned home. By the 1960s, Indigenous activism, led by figures such as Harold Cardinal and the National Indian Brotherhood, demanded community control of education. In 1969, the federal government under Jean Chrétien took over schools from the churches and began converting them into day or band-run schools. The system continued until 1996, when the last residential school closed. Over 150,000 children had passed through these institutions. In 2021, the remains of 215 children were discovered on the grounds of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School, confirming the scope of the system's impact. In 1998 and 2008, the Canadian government issued official apologies. A $1.9 billion compensation fund was established in 2005. Investigations and memorial projects continue to document the history and identify the missing children. Yuzhong Academy. In 2013, a new private correctional school named Yuzhong Academy opened in Nanchang, China. The school's founders claimed it would reform teenagers suffering from internet addiction or disobedience to their parents. Students arrived from all over China. Some were sent by families, while others were escorted by so-called education agents. The campus did not have typical classrooms. There were dark rooms with locked doors, long corridors, and metal rods instead of books. Teachers used iron rulers and bamboo sticks to punish students. According to the rules, students had to kneel for hours for violating dormitory rules. Students knelt on the concrete floor for hours, wrote hundreds of lines of confession, or stood in the sun without sleep. Those who resisted were locked in small, dark rooms for several days. The windows were sealed and the light was turned off. Some students reported being beaten for crying or talking without permission. Others lost more than 20 kilograms from constant labor and starvation. By 2016, stories of beatings began to leak onto the internet. Former students recounted how they lost weight and slept on concrete floors. They hauled bricks to build new dormitories and memorized moral texts between punishment sessions. One boy tried to drink detergent to escape. Parents who visited the academy found beaten children and dilapidated dormitories. They reported the school. In 2017, local journalists infiltrated the campus. Police soon followed. Investigators found rooms with barred windows and evidence of prolonged confinement. Students confirmed they could not leave the campus without permission. The school was finally shut down in November 2017. Its founders and responsible staff were convicted. Wu Junbao was sentenced to approximately 2 years and 10 months in prison. Ren Weiqiang to approximately 2 years and 7 months. Some teachers also received court sentences. Following the trial, China introduced new regulations that prohibit corporal punishment and forced confinement in educational institutions. The buildings of Yuzhong Academy remain locked and silent. Behind its rusty gates, the story of the school, which promised reform but brought pain, still remains a cautionary tale for every parent. Learners School, Pakistan. In August 2016, a regular day began at Learners School, a private school in Drosh, Chitral district, northern Pakistan. The students included children aged 8 to 10. The class teacher was a man named Inamul Kabir. His students were gathering for morning classes. Some were late. A few minutes later, one of the older students turned on a mobile phone camera. The video showed the teacher chasing the children and hitting their backs and legs with a stick. The students tried to cover themselves with their hands and retreated towards the wall, but the man continued to beat them in the schoolyard. The video lasted about 1 minute and 36 seconds. It showed several children trying to run away, while others stood still, waiting their turn. A few hours later, the video appeared online. Social media users began sharing the recording, tagging local Chitral authorities in their posts. On the same day, representatives from the school department arrived at the educational institution and called the police. Police officers detained the teacher, Inamul Kabir, and took him to the station. An official First Information Report, FIR, was registered against him under the Child Protection Welfare Act 2010. The school management closed the campus during the investigation. The Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Education Department formed a 2-member commission to verify the circumstances of the case. The teacher was suspended from his job. Investigators interviewed witnesses and examined the video recording. Journalists from Dawn and the Express Tribune published articles confirming the arrest and the start of the investigation. A few days later, the court sent Inamul Kabir to 7-day judicial custody. The school was temporarily sealed. Following the incident, the region's Ministry of Education circulated a reminder about the ban on corporal punishment in educational institutions. The video remained in media archives as one of the first documentary confirmations of systematic violence in Pakistani schools, becoming the basis for tightening control over private educational establishments.